I never thought a simple fence would start a neighborhood war. $1,000 HOA fine turned my dream home into a battlefield. They wanted me to tear my fence down, but I don't bow to bullies. So instead of giving in, I built a castle. When my wife and I first drove into Maple Glen Estates, it looked like the kind of neighborhood people dream about. The streets curved in wide, graceful loops lined with oak trees that cast long shadows over trimmed emerald lawns. Every house looked freshly painted, white trims, navy shutters, American flags hanging from porches that probably hadn't seen a storm in years. You could almost smell the lawn fertilizer in the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of someone's sprinkler mist drifting across the asphalt. It felt safe, predictable. After years of apartment living in Austin, neighbors blasting music through paper-thin walls, random cars taking our parking spots, the constant noise, Maple Glen felt like peace. We found a house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. 3 bedrooms, brick exterior, a big backyard, shaded by 2 old pecan trees. It was perfect. When the realtor handed us the keys, she smiled and said, "Welcome to Maple Glen, y'all. Just remember to check your HOA packet. They're a little particular about things here." I laughed it off them. Particular sounded better than chaotic. I figured a few rules couldn't hurt. After all, that's what kept neighborhoods like this beautiful, right? Right. Or so I thought. Our first few weeks were everything we'd hoped for. Mornings were quiet, the air crisp and still, except for the hum of sprinklers turning on like clockwork. I'd drink my coffee on the back porch, watching the sunlight cut through the branches, while our new rescue dog, Baxter, chased butterflies through the uncut grass. Neighbors waved from across the street. Too friendly, maybe, but in a way that made you feel like you belonged. The family next door, the Millers, brought over a bundt cake the first weekend. 2 doors down, an older man named Stan introduced himself while trimming his roses. He mentioned almost proudly that Maple Glen had won a Best Neighborhood in Travis County award 3 years in a row. "It's all thanks to the HOA," he said, nodding toward the community sign. "Keeps things tidy, keeps people honest." I smiled, not knowing what that meant. The HOA felt like background noise, some administrative machine that handled trash pickup schedules and organized the 4th of July parade. They sent a welcome packet the first week, 73 pages of bylaws, regulations, and a glossy brochure titled "Living the Maple Glen Way." I didn't read it, not all of it, at least. I skimmed through the highlights, trash cans out only between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m., grass no taller than 4 inches, mailbox color standardized to maple bronze, fence height limited to 5 feet, unless something. I can't even remember the exception. We'd just moved in. I wasn't thinking about fences. It didn't take long to realize the HOA wasn't some distant office somewhere. It was everywhere. There were monthly newsletters printed on thick paper, slid neatly into every mailbox. Phrases like "Community pride starts with you" and "Report violations anonymously" made me raise an eyebrow. Every Saturday morning, I'd see the same silver SUV slowly rolling through the streets. Sometimes it stopped in front of a house for a few minutes, engine idling. A woman would step out, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of something. Trash bins left too long, a car parked on the street overnight, a lawn that needed edging. Her name was Marge Whitfield. Everyone knew her name. Everyone used it carefully. Marge was in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, but she walked with the posture of someone who'd never backed down from anything in her life. Her hair was white blonde, set in that perfect old-school curl, and she wore big sunglasses that hid her eyes even on cloudy days. I remember the first time she spoke to me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, maybe our second week there. I was unloading groceries when her SUV pulled up right behind my driveway. She didn't step out right away, just sat there, watching, scribbling something on her clipboard. Then slowly the door opened and she approached, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Afternoon," she chirped. "You must be the new homeowners, the Harrisons, right?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, trying to sound polite. "I'm Marge, HOA president." She said it like a title, president, not just a volunteer. "Just wanted to make sure you got your welcome packet. You did get it, right?" "Yes, thank you, we did." "Wonderful." She looked past me, scanning our yard. "I noticed your trash cans are still out. Pickup was this morning." "Oh, yeah, I just got back from work. I'll pull them in." "Good," she said, writing something down. "We like to keep things tidy here. A beautiful neighborhood is a disciplined neighborhood." I smiled thinly. "Understood." Her gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. Then she nodded, got back in her SUV, and drove off at 10 miles an hour. When I came inside, my wife asked, "Who was that?" "Our new neighborhood sheriff," I said. The longer we lived there, the more I noticed how Maple Glen operated. Every lawn was trimmed with military precision. Every house looked identical, right down to the potted plants by the porch. The moment something stood out, it disappeared. Like the family who'd hung wind chimes that apparently violated a noise disturbance clause, or the teenager who parked his car on the street for 2 nights and woke up to a $150 fine taped to his windshield. It wasn't just the rules, it was the fear. At block parties, neighbors smiled, laughed, and talked about gardening. But between conversations, someone always lowered their voice and muttered about Marge. She fined the Andersons for painting their shutters one shade too dark. She made the Wilsons remove their garden gnomes, said they were unapproved decorations. She even checked the grass length with a ruler once. Everyone had a Marge story. Yet no one did anything. When I asked Stan about it one afternoon, he just shook his head. "It's easier to stay off her radar. Trust me, you don't want to end up in her little binder." Her binder. That was the thing of legend. A thick, 3-ring folder she carried everywhere, stuffed with photos, notes, printouts, and violations. It was Maple Glen's unofficial law book, and everyone lived in fear of being in it. It started innocently enough. We'd just adopted Baxter, a sweet, clumsy golden retriever who'd spent his first 2 years in shelters. He was nervous around strangers and loved to run, so a fence felt like the obvious next step. The backyard already had a low, old picket fence, barely 3 feet tall and falling apart. I figured I'd replace it with something sturdier. So one Saturday, I measured out the yard and called a contractor. He recommended cedar, durable, weather-resistant, and good for privacy. "How tall you want it?" he asked. 6 feet should do," I said, without thinking. That's the standard height, right? Every yard I'd ever seen had a 6-foot fence. He nodded. "That's what most folks around here do." It took 3 days to finish. The smell of fresh-cut wood filled the yard, sharp and clean. When it was done, it looked perfect. Simple, natural, a nice contrast to the brick. My wife loved it. Finally, we could let Baxter roam free. That night, I grilled burgers while he chased fireflies across the lawn. The sun dipped behind the houses, cicadas buzzed, and for the first time since moving in, I felt completely at peace. But peace, in Maple Glen, was temporary. 2 mornings later, I found a white envelope tucked into our front door frame. The HOA logo was printed neatly in the corner. Maple leaves encircling a house. Inside was a typed letter on thick stationery. Notice of violation. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, it has come to our attention that your newly constructed backyard fence exceeds the maximum allowable height of 5 feet, as per Maple Glen Estates HOA Regulation 7B. This fence is not in compliance with community standards and must be modified or removed within 10 business days to avoid a fine of $1,000. We appreciate your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association, Marge Whitfield, President. I read it twice, then laughed. They've got to be kidding. My wife looked over my shoulder. They're fining us for a fence? Everyone has a fence. Exactly. The first letter arrived on a Monday morning. It was folded perfectly, slipped under my doormat like someone wanted to make sure I'd see it the moment I opened the door. The Maple Glen logo, 2 maple leaves circling a little house, stared up at me in gold ink. For a second I thought it was another welcome notice or maybe a reminder about the upcoming block barbecue. But as soon as I unfolded the page and read the bold print at the top, my stomach sank. Violation notice. Fence exceeds approved height of 5 feet per HOA Regulation 7B. Fine, $1,000. I actually laughed, out loud. It was one of those disbelieving laughs, the kind that comes right before anger has a chance to take over. $1,000 for a fence? I read the letter again, slower this time. It was signed, of course, by Marge Whitfield, HOA President. The letter gave me 10 days to remove or modify the fence or face doubling penalties and potential further action. Further action. The phrase felt like a threat written in legalese. My wife found me standing in the kitchen, letter in hand. "What's that?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Our friendly HOA wants to fine us $1,000. She blinked. For what? The fence. The fence? She repeated, setting the mug down. You mean the same kind everyone else has? Exactly. She sighed. You're joking. I wasn't. I grabbed my phone and called the HOA management office listed on the bottom of the letter. A young woman named Tiffany answered, her voice bright and rehearsed. Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association, how can I help you? Yes, I said, trying to keep my tone even. This is Alex Harrison, 2409 Oak Hollow. I just received a violation notice about my fence. There must be some kind of mistake. She paused, the sound of typing faint in the background. Let me check your file. One moment, please. There was soft hold music, something painfully cheerful, like the kind that plays in dentist offices. When she came back, her voice was smoother, colder. It looks like your property was inspected last week by the HOA president. The fence was found to be in violation of Regulation 7B regarding height restrictions. I understand that, I said, but my fence is 6 feet, so is half the neighborhood. If it's a rule, it's not being enforced fairly. I can only tell you what's in our records, sir. Can you send me the regulation? I'd like to read it myself. Of course, she said. Mrs. Whitfield can provide that. I'll have her email you directly. Great, and while you're at it, could you tell me when that rule was approved? Silence. Then, I don't have that information in front of me, sir. I could practically hear the shrug through the phone. All right, thanks, I said, forcing the word through gritted teeth. The email from Marge came less than an hour later. Subject line, Fence Regulation Clarification. The message itself was short and painfully polite. Dear Mr. Harrison, please see attached excerpt from the HOA Guidelines, Section 7B. As per our most recent update, fences exceeding 5 feet are not permitted within Maple Glen Estates without written approval from the board. Best, Marge Whitfield, HOA President. The attached document was a single scanned page. The font was different from the rest of the manual I remembered. The margins didn't line up, and the text looked like it had been inserted in a hurry, no page numbers, no signature block. It felt fake, or at least newly convenient. I compared it to my original homeowner's packet, flipping through the old printed pages I'd kept in a drawer. Regulation 7B in my copy mentioned nothing about a 5-foot limit. I sent Marge a reply. "Hi Marge, I checked my copy of the HOA handbook and the section you sent doesn't match the version provided when we moved in. Can you clarify when this update was approved and communicated to residents? Thanks, Alex Harrison." Her response came 5 minutes later. "Mr. Harrison, the board reserves the right to make updates to community standards as needed. All changes are approved internally and distributed via newsletter. Perhaps you missed that communication. M. Whitfield." That was it. No date, no copy of the approval, just a subtle jab that maybe I hadn't been paying attention. That week, something in the neighborhood shifted. People I used to wave to every morning started pretending not to see me. When I walked Baxter around the block, a few neighbors would glance at the fence and quickly look away. Others whispered over hedges, their voices dipping just low enough that I couldn't make out the words, but high enough that I knew they were about me. It was eerie, like I'd become radioactive overnight. One afternoon, while I was dragging my trash cans to the curb, Nancy Miller, who lived next door, came out in her gardening gloves. She hesitated, then said quietly, "You're not really going to fight her, are you?" "Who?" "Marge." She looked around like someone might be listening. "You should just pay the fine, Alex. It's easier." "Easier?" I said, stunned. "For who?" "For everyone," she whispered. "She doesn't let things go." Then she turned and went back inside, closing her door gently, but firmly. It hit me then. This place wasn't just run by Marge. It was ruled by her. People feared her like a ghost story that occasionally came true. It started as coincidence, I told myself. Every morning around 7:30 as I left for work, I'd see that same silver SUV idling at the end of the street. Sometimes it would follow slowly behind as I turned the corner, then peel off to another house. Other times it would stop in front of mine and just sit there. Clipboard on the dash, camera phone in hand. One morning I caught her red-handed, standing by the sidewalk, photographing the side of my fence from 3 different angles. I stepped outside. "Morning, Marge," I called, my voice polite but tight. She smiled without turning around. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. Just doing routine inspections." "Of my house?" "Of all houses," she said, finally facing me. "You know how it is. Some people forget the rules." "I'm sure," I said. Her sunglasses reflected my own face back at me. Then she turned, made one final note on her clipboard and walked away. Baxter growled softly behind the screen door. I knew exactly how he felt. 3 days later, another envelope appeared. Same logo, same elegant paper. Final notice: failure to comply with Regulation 7D will result in a $2,000 fine and referral to the HOA Legal Committee for further enforcement. Deadline: 48 hours. I felt my jaw clench. Legal Committee. I hadn't even known we had one. I stormed inside, letter in hand. My wife looked up from the kitchen table, her face falling immediately. "Another one?" Apparently, the first threat wasn't scary enough. She rubbed her temples. "Alex, maybe we should just lower it. I know it's unfair, but—" "That's not the point," I snapped, then caught myself. "Sorry, it's just, if we give in now, what's next? They'll tell us what color to paint our door, how tall our trees can grow." "They already do that," she said softly. She wasn't wrong. Still, I couldn't stomach the idea of letting Marge win so easily. "I'm going to the meeting," I said. "If they're going to fine me, they're at least going to look me in the eye while they do it." The next Tuesday, I walked into the Maple Glen Community Center for my first ever HOA meeting. The building was a single-story structure at the edge of the subdivision, all beige paint and buzzing fluorescent lights. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where 5 board members sat, each with a nameplate. Marge sat in the center like a queen among courtiers. Her clipboard was replaced tonight by a sleek binder. The room was half full, mostly older residents, couples, a few families. Conversations died down as I entered. I could feel the looks. I took a seat near the front. The meeting began with the usual niceties: budget updates, landscaping contracts, the upcoming Easter egg hunt. Then, halfway down the agenda, Marge cleared her throat. Next item, property violation case number 247B regarding fence height at 2409 Oak Hollow. My stomach tightened. She looked up. "Mr. Harrison, would you like to address the board?" I stood, holding a manila folder. Yes, I would. I laid out printed photos of half a dozen fences from around the neighborhood, each clearly over 5 feet tall. "These are all from Maple Glen," I said, "all 6 feet or higher. None of these homeowners have been fined, so why am I the only one receiving notices?" There was a murmur in the room. People craned their necks to see the photos. Marge looked at them for exactly 3 seconds before smiling faintly. "Those fences were approved by previous boards. Times change." "Times change?" I repeated. "That's your explanation?" "Regulations evolve to preserve community aesthetics. Your fence was built after the update. The rules apply." "And when exactly was this update approved?" She tapped her binder. "As per HOA policy, updates are approved internally and distributed via newsletter. Perhaps you missed that community." And I was done paying for it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting every creak of the house, every tick of the clock, every time the sprinkler system outside hissed to life. My wife had fallen asleep hours ago, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. All I could see in my head was that letter, that smug line about failure to comply. The way Marge had smiled at the meeting, calm and condescending, like I was just another unruly child she'd have to handle. I'd played by the rules all my life. I paid my dues. I painted my shutters the exact beige they told me to. I waved to my neighbors. I kept the grass short, the trash bins hidden, the mailbox polished. I'd done everything right. And still, they came for me. I turned on my side, staring at the soft glow of the digital clock. 2:47 a.m. Sleep wasn't happening. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my wife, and padded barefoot through the dark house. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The moonlight spilled across the backyard. The fence, my crime scene, stood there, solid and harmless. The cedar planks looked almost silver in the night light. I felt my jaw tighten. $1,000. For that? I could almost hear Marge's voice in my head. "Regulations evolve, Mr. Harrison." Yeah, well, so do people. By morning, the anger had curdled into something else. Determination. I brewed coffee, pulled out my old sketchbook, and went out back. Baxter followed me, tail wagging, oblivious to all the drama. I stood there staring at the fence, sipping from my mug. The air was still cool, the sun barely cresting over the rooftops. "You think that's too tall, huh?" I muttered to myself. Baxter tilted his head. And that's when it hit me. Not just an idea, a spark. Something bold, reckless, a little ridiculous, and completely mine. If they thought my fence was a problem, then I'd give them something worth complaining about. Something they couldn't ignore. I went back inside, grabbed a pencil, and started sketching. Lines turned into walls, walls into towers, pillars, arches, a gate large enough for a king's carriage to pass through. I wasn't building a fence anymore. I was building a statement. A castle, right in the heart of Maple Glen Estates. Every detail came from a place between fury and fascination. The stones would be rough, medieval style, each corner capped with decorative battlements. The gate, arched and ironbound, would open inward to reveal the same little backyard, the same harmless dog, the same law-abiding homeowner. But now it would all sit behind something impossible to ignore. I found a local contractor through a late-night Google search. Bradley Mason Construction. The reviews were mixed, but passionate. Half the people said he was a genius, the other half said he was too creative for his own good. Perfect. When he picked up, his voice was gravelly, like someone who'd been up since dawn. "This is Brad." "Hey, Brad. My name's Alex Harrison. I've got kind of a weird request." "Weird's fine. What are we building?" "A fence," I said, then paused. "But not just any fence. I want something medieval. Stone, pillars, maybe a wooden gate that looks like it belongs in a castle courtyard." He was quiet for a second. Then he chuckled. "That's new. What's the story behind it?" "Let's just say my HOA and I aren't seeing eye to eye." That got a laugh out of him. "Say no more. I've done a few of those projects. What's your timeline?" "As soon as possible." He hesitated. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." There was a low whistle on the line. "All right, man, I'm in. Send me some photos and sketches. I'll come by tomorrow to check the space." Brad showed up the next morning in a faded work truck with Mason Construction hand-painted on the door. He was in his mid-40s, beard flecked with gray, jeans dusted in dry cement. The kind of guy who probably knew how to build a cabin with nothing but an axe and coffee. He walked the perimeter of the fence slowly, hands in his pockets, occasionally squatting to study the ground. "This HOA," he said finally, "they give you any specific rules about materials?" "They think they have rules about everything." He grinned. "So, you want this to what? Make a point?" "I want it to make the point." He nodded approvingly. "I like that. But you know this is going to draw attention. You'll probably make the front page of whatever newsletter that president lady runs." "That's the idea." Brad laughed. "You've got guts. All right, I'll draw up a quote. It'll take a few truckloads of stone, a small crew, and a couple weeks. You sure you're ready for the noise?" I smiled for the first time in days. I've been ready since the first letter. When the first truck pulled up 3 days later, it was like the neighborhood had collectively stopped breathing. The rumble of the diesel engine echoed down Oak Hollow Drive. Every curtain twitched. Every neighbor peeked through their blinds. The driver dropped the tailgate, and a mountain of gray stone clattered onto my driveway. Baxter barked like crazy, tail wagging, as if he knew something exciting was about to happen. And right on cue, a silver SUV slowed to a crawl at the end of the cul-de-sac. Marge. She rolled down her window just enough to peek out. Our eyes met. For a second, her expression didn't change. Then it did. Her face drained of color, mouth tightening into a thin, white line. She didn't say a word, just hit the gas and drove off. And that moment, watching her retreat down the street powerless for once, felt like my first real victory. Brad's crew showed up the next morning. They were a loud, cheerful bunch, 3 guys with trucker hats and permanent sunburns. They worked fast, unloading mortar, rebar, and pallets of stone, setting up sawhorses and tarps like they were preparing for battle. By noon, the sound of hammers and drills filled the air. The first section of wall went up along the left side of the yard, thick, textured stone, about 4 feet high, capped with a decorative edge that gave it a fortress look. By day 2, the pillars started taking shape. By day 3, people were stopping to watch. A jogger slowed down, then stopped entirely.
A woman walking her poodle stood across the street for a solid 10 minutes, phone out, pretending to text while she filmed. And of course, Marge came by again. This time she parked directly across from my house, stepped out in her immaculate navy plants and matching blazer, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she called over the construction noise. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. "Morning, Marge. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She glanced at the half-built wall. You realize, this structure will need to be reviewed by the HOA Architectural Committee." "Oh, absolutely," I said. "I filed my modification request yesterday." Her eyebrows rose. "You did?" "Yup. Certified mail. You should be getting it any day now." That part wasn't technically true, but the look on her face was worth it. She pursed her lips. "This seems excessive." I shrugged. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. She stared at me for another long moment, then turned on her heel and walked back to her car. Brad watched her go and smirked. "You weren't kidding about the HOA." "I told you, this isn't just construction. It's performance art." By the end of the first week, the wall was halfway complete. The stone shimmered faintly in the afternoon sun, each block interlocking perfectly. The arched gate had arrived, oak reinforced with wrought iron, and it leaned against the house like an ancient relic waiting to be set into place. And the neighborhood? Oh, they were losing their minds. I'd see small clusters of people on sidewalks, whispering, cars slowed as they passed, kids on bikes stopped and gawked, wide-eyed. Someone, I still don't know who, even created an Instagram account called @MapleGlen_Castle. Within days, it had hundreds of followers. People started leaving comments like, "Finally someone stood up to that HOA witch." Legend. "This belongs on HGTV." But behind the humor and the novelty, there was something else. A quiet thrill. A shared understanding among the residents. Marge Whitfield had ruled Maple Glen Estates like a queen for over a decade. She'd fined people for mismatched shutters, for planting unauthorized tulips, for parking their own cars an inch too close to the curb. And now, someone had challenged her authority. "This isn't just about me anymore," I told her. "If she gets away with this, she'll do it again, to someone else." She sighed. "Just promise me you'll stay calm." I smiled faintly. "I'll try." The Maple Glen Community Center was already packed when I arrived. Folding chairs filled the room, everyone occupied. People lined the walls, whispering, craning their necks toward the front where the HOA board sat at a long table. At the center of it all, Marge. Her hair was pulled back tighter than usual, her pearl necklace glinting under the fluorescent lights. The clipboard sat before her like a judge's gavel. Beside her sat the other board members, Tom, the quiet one with the mustache, Denise, who always wore floral blouses, and Peter, who'd never once looked up from his paperwork in any meeting I'd attended. As I walked in, conversations rippled across the room. Some people smiled, some nodded encouragement, others just looked nervous. I took a seat in the second row. Marge didn't look at me, not yet. She tapped her gavel once. The sharp crack silenced the room. "This emergency session," she began, "has been called to address an egregious violation of community standards and the architectural code." Her voice was steady, commanding. She didn't need to say my name. Everyone knew. Marge continued, "Over the past 2 weeks, a structure, a wall, in fact, has been erected at 2409 Oak Hollow Drive. This so-called fence stands in direct violation of Section 7B of the HOA regulations, which clearly limits fence height to 5 feet and restricts material to pre-approved wood or vinyl. She lifted a paper triumphantly. The homeowner in question was informed of this rule, refused to comply, and proceeded to build a massive stone fortress without approval. Such defiance cannot be tolerated if we wish to maintain order in this community. A murmur spread through the crowd. I raised my hand. Marge sighed. "Mr. Harrison, you'll have your turn to speak." "I think now's a good time," I said, standing. Her eyes narrowed. "Fine. Proceed." I held up a worn binder, the original HOA manual that had come with my home purchase packet. "This," I said, "is the Maple Glen Estates Architectural Standards Manual, the version dated 2012, the same one I received at closing." I flipped it open, turning pages slowly so everyone could see. Section 7B, I read out loud. "Fences must be maintained in good condition. Recommended height between 4 and 6 feet. Homeowners are encouraged to match neighborhood aesthetics." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Notice anything missing?" I asked. Marge's jaw tightened. "No mention of material restrictions? No mention of a 5-foot limit? No required approvals for existing structures?" The crowd started murmuring louder now. People leaned forward, whispering to one another. "So," I said, flipping the binder closed with a soft thud, "when exactly did this mysterious 5-foot wood-only rule appear?" Marge's face was turning red. "That rule has always been in place." "Really?" I said. "Because when I asked you to send me the regulation, you emailed me a scanned copy that looked suspiciously edited." There was a soft gasp from somewhere in the back. "I compared it to my copy. The fonts didn't match, the footer date was missing, and, funny enough, the only section that looked new was the one about fences." I looked straight at her. "So tell us, Marge, when exactly was that rule added?" For a moment, the room went silent. Marge shuffled her papers, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then from the far end of the table, Tom cleared his throat. "Marge," he said softly. She ignored him. He spoke again, louder. "Marge!" Everyone turned. Tom looked uncomfortable, but there was a strange firmness in his eyes. He said, I think we should be honest." Marge shot him a look that could kill. "Tom, not now." He swallowed hard. "It was added last month without a member vote." The room exploded. People gasped, shouted, turned to one another in disbelief. Someone stood up and yelled, "You can't do that!" Marge slammed her gavel. "Order! Order!" But no one listened. I just stood there, heart pounding, watching it all unravel. "Tom," she hissed, "you weren't supposed to—" He cut her off. "Homeowners were supposed to be notified. We never sent the letter. You said we'll handle it internally." More shouting. A woman in the front row muttered, "I knew something was off." Someone else pulled out their phone and started recording. That's when I noticed them, 2 local news reporters standing in the back. They must have been tipped off by a neighbor, maybe the same one who'd posted about the castle online. One of them had a camera on a tripod. The red light blinked steadily. Marge saw them too. Her face went white. "Excuse me," she said, forcing a smile. "This meeting is closed to the press." The reporter didn't budge. "We were invited by a homeowner. Public property, ma'am." Her fake smile faltered. "Turn that off immediately. Actually, the reporter said. "We're very interested in this story. Homeowner rights, HOA overreach, that sort of thing." The crowd started cheering. Marge slammed the gavel again, harder than this time, the sound cracking like thunder. "This meeting is adjourned." She tried to stand, but people were already surrounding the table, demanding answers, holding up phones, snapping photos. Tom looked overwhelmed. Denise buried her face in her hands. Peter quietly gathered his papers and slipped out the side door. I stood back, just watching the chaos unfold. For months, I'd been on the receiving end of her control, her rules, her letters, her threats. Now, she was the one cornered. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Neighbors texted screenshots of local headlines. Homeowner exposes HOA rule tampering in fiery meeting. Castle builder versus HOA president. Power shifts in Maple Glen. The video clip went viral on Facebook. Marge's red face, Tom's confession, the cheers that followed. By noon, I got another letter. This one wasn't on HOA letterhead. Just a single sheet of paper with one line. "Effective immediately, I hereby resign as president of the Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association. ... Marge Whitfield." No apology, no explanation. Just surrender. My wife read it over my shoulder, then exhaled in disbelief. "Is it over?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "I think so." The following week, a new interim board announced a full audit of HOA rules. All pending fines, including mine, were dismissed. They even issued a neighborhood-wide statement acknowledging procedural inconsistencies and promising transparency going forward. It was their way of saying, "We messed up," without actually saying it. And Marge, she disappeared. Her silver SUV stopped making her morning patrols. Her house went dark for weeks. Eventually, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Some said she moved to Florida. Others whispered she joined another HOA somewhere out west. I didn't care. For the first time, Maple Glen felt free. Neighbors started chatting again. Kids played outside past dusk without fear of noise violations. Someone even parked an RV in their driveway for a whole weekend, and nobody complained. It was like the neighborhood had collectively exhaled after years of holding its breath. One evening, I sat out on the porch watching the sunset reflect off the castle walls. Baxter chased his ball across the yard, tail wagging, tongue hanging out. My wife came out with 2 beers, handed me one, and smiled. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Building it?" I shook my head. "Not for a second." She took a sip. "You know people still talk about you at the meetings. Half the board wants to make your castle the new logo for the HOA newsletter." I laughed. "You're kidding." "I'm not." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. The world had gone quiet again. No gavel, no fines, no rules beyond reason, just peace. And as the sky deepened into...
Tom even smiled when he saw me in the back row. "Nice to see you again, Alex," he said. "No torches or pitchforks tonight, I hope?" I chuckled. "Not unless someone tries to outlaw castles again." The room laughed. It was small, but it mattered. For the first time in years, Maple Glen felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. Marge's house sold within a month of her resignation. I drove by once, out of curiosity. The new owners were repainting the shutters and had replaced her manicured rose bushes with wildflowers. It looked less like a magazine cover and more like a home. Someone told me Marge moved down to Sarasota, Florida, to start fresh. I can picture her now, arguing with a condo board about paint colors or mailbox designs, clipboard in hand, hunting her next violation. Part of me should feel angry still after everything she put me through, but I don't. Because in the end, she gave me something she never meant to: clarity. See, when you live under constant control, when you're told where your trash cans can sit, what shade your blinds can be, what kind of flowers are appropriate, you start to shrink without realizing it. You make yourself smaller to avoid attention. You start apologizing for existing. That was me before all this. I used to think being a good neighbor meant staying quiet, blending in, not making waves. Then one day, someone tried to charge me $1,000 for a fence that kept my dog safe, and something in me snapped. What started as anger turned into something deeper, a need to draw a line, not just around my yard, but around my dignity. When I built those walls, I wasn't just defying Marge, I was reclaiming space, literal and emotional. Those stones became therapy. Every time I lifted one into place, I felt lighter. Every hammer strike, every scrape of mortar chipped away at years of silent frustration. By the time Fort Freedom stood complete, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Now people drive from all over to see it. On weekends, I'll catch tourists stopping by, phones out, snapping pictures like they've stumbled onto a fairy tale castle tucked in a suburban cul-de-sac. One family even asked if they could take Christmas photos by the gate. I said yes, of course. Kids call it the neighborhood fortress. Sometimes I hear them daring each other to storm the castle. They giggle and run around the outer wall pretending to be knights or dragons. It's surreal, but it makes me smile. What started as rebellion became a landmark. Not everyone loves it, of course. A few of the old-timers still mutter about how I ruined the uniform look. One guy, Howard, I think, told me I'd single-handedly turned Maple Glen into a sideshow. I told him maybe it was time for a better show. He didn't laugh. But the irony? My property value went up. An appraiser came by last month for a refinancing estimate. When I told him about the fight with the HOA, he chuckled. "You'd be surprised," he said. "Unique homes with stories like this, buyers love them. People want character now, not cookie-cutter boxes." Character. I liked that word. Maybe that's what Fort Freedom really is. Proof that character still has a place in a world obsessed with conformity. Baxter, my dog, certainly doesn't mind. Every evening he runs laps inside the walls, tail wagging, completely oblivious to how his safety once sparked a war. He's getting older now, gray around the muzzle, but when he bounds across the grass and barks at squirrels from behind the stone, he looks like the king of his own domain. Sometimes I sit on the back patio, a beer in hand, and watch him. The walls glow orange in the sunset, the same color as the evening that started it all. That $1,000 fine was supposed to break me. Instead, it built something permanent. I didn't just build a wall, I built a boundary, a reminder that not every rule deserves obedience. A few months back, I got an email from a reporter, the same one who covered the infamous HOA meeting. She wanted a follow-up interview. "Your story resonated with a lot of people," she wrote. "We've been flooded with letters from homeowners who saw themselves in your fight." I met her at the community center, right where it had all gone down. "Do you ever think you went too far?" she asked, holding her recorder up. I thought about that for a while. "No," I said finally. "If I'd just paid the fine, it wouldn't have stopped there. People like Marge don't stop until someone says no." She nodded slowly. "You don't seem angry anymore." "I'm not," I said.
I just learned that peace isn't something you wait for. You build it yourself. She smiled at that. That's poetic. I shrugged. So was the fence, apparently. When the article went live, the headline read, "Man builds castle to protect his dog and ends up protecting his neighborhood." It felt fitting. The castle changed me too, in quieter ways. Before all this, I spent years just going through the motions. Commute, bills, HOA meetings, rinse, repeat. I'd lost that spark, that sense of creation. But building something with my own hands, designing it from scratch, fighting for the right to do it, that woke something up. Now I'm sketching again, working with my hands. I even started helping a buddy from work with his backyard renovation. He jokes that I'm his resident castle consultant. Maybe it's silly, but it feels good to make something tangible, something that lasts. Sometimes at night, I walk the perimeter with a flashlight. I trace my hand along the stone, feeling the cool texture beneath my fingers. Each rock has a story, a day of labor, a moment of frustration, a burst of stubborn hope. And in the quiet, I think about how close I came to giving up. If I just paid the fine, swallowed my pride, and torn the fence down, none of this would exist. The thought chills me, because that's how control works. Slowly, invisibly, it convinces you that compliance is easier than courage. But courage builds castles. A few weeks ago, the HOA hosted its first community fair in years. There were food trucks, live music, even a bouncy house for the kids. When Tom stood up to give a short speech, he gestured toward my house in the distance. "I think we can all agree," he said with a grin, "that Maple Glen is stronger when everyone has a voice, even the loud ones." People laughed and clapped. I raised my cup of lemonade in mock salute. Later, Tom found me. "You know, we're planning a community art project, murals on the park wall. You interested in helping design it?" I hesitated. Then I smiled. "Sure, but only if we call it Fort Freedom Park." He laughed. "Deal." Now, every time I drive home and see those gray walls rising at the end of the cul-de-sac, I don't see defiance anymore. I see belonging. I see proof that standing your ground doesn't isolate you, it inspires others to stand a little taller too. The castle isn't just mine anymore. It's part of Maple Glen's identity. A story parents tell their kids when they ask why our neighborhood doesn't look like all the others. Because once upon a time, they'll say, someone built a castle when the rules said he couldn't. And maybe those kids will grow up believing that sometimes it's okay to push back, to question, to build higher. When people ask if it was worth it, the fines, the stress, the sleepless nights, I always think back to that morning when the first truck dropped off the stones. I remember the weight of that first piece in my hands, the ache in my arms, the sound of Baxter barking from the porch. It was heavy, awkward, exhausting, but it felt right. Because every inch of that wall, every ounce of resistance was a piece of freedom carved in stone. Freedom to create. Freedom to belong without submission. Freedom to be a homeowner, not a subject. Now, when I see Baxter run inside those walls, tail high, safe and happy, I think of the irony. The HOA wanted to fine me for protecting my dog. Instead, I ended up protecting something far bigger. A principle. That your home is more than property lines and bylaws. It's where you draw the line between fear and freedom, between compliance and courage. That's what Fort Freedom stands for. And every time I sit on the patio listening to the wind whistle through the battlements, I remember the lesson that started it all. When people try to fence you in, build high